So thank you very much for joining us and for making time for this webinar, whether you're joining live or watching the recording later. We have a really exciting program looking at social and emotional learning development beyond the classroom this morning. My name is Dominic Regester. I'm a program director here with Salzburg Global Seminar. Salzburg Global Seminar is an independent, non-profit organization that's been around for almost 75 years. And throughout our history, our core purpose has always been about working with current and future leaders to shape a better world. I lead our education work, and over the last 5 years, we've had a particular focus on social and emotional learning. Now, there were many reasons why we wanted to focus on this, but high amongst them was the conviction that social and emotional learning is a really legitimate part of the solution to multiple challenges that countries and communities around the world are facing. If your main concern is about the economies of tomorrow and employability and the capacity or opportunity that young people in education will have to find work when so many jobs are likely to be outsourced to AR algorithms, then there is an absolutely legitimate and necessary reason for looking at social and emotional learning now, because there is a really strong correlation between social and emotional learning skills and the kind of skills that will be at a premium or highly valued in the economies of tomorrow. We're already beginning to see many manifestations of this trend. Just last week, I think it was, Forbes magazine rated empathy as the most important or desirable leadership quality in the 21st century, as one example of that. Separate to economic considerations, if your main focus is on mental health and well-being for young people, then you absolutely should be looking at social and emotional learning now. Pre-pandemic, back in 2016, the World Health Organization put out a report that said, based on current trends, depression was likely to be the largest cause of adolescent illness and disability globally by 2030, and that was pre-pandemic. Now, there is a really strong evidence base that shows how the early introduction of social and emotional learning techniques, social and emotional skills development opportunities can help young people grow up with a kind of mental architecture that will let them navigate later life mental health challenges. Social and emotional skills, social and emotional learning has a really important role to play around developing community cohesion, to helping young people develop their sense of identity and belonging with all the spin-off benefits or downstream benefits that this can have. Social and emotional learning is proven to help with improving equity of education outcomes, particularly for students growing up in different kinds of disadvantage. And looking longer term, there is a growing body of more hypothetical or experimental research which looks at the kinds of skills that populations will need to have in greater abundance if we are to meet the challenges that the Sustainable Development Goals look to mitigate against, if we're to help navigate the complexity of the 21st century. And unsurprisingly, social and emotional skills ranked very highly in all of that analysis. So investing and supporting social and emotional learning programs is in many, many different ways, not just the smart thing to do, it is absolutely the right thing to do at this point in time. And across the board, more opportunities to develop social and emotional skills will benefit students of all ages throughout their lives. Now, school is obviously one place in which this can happen, and around the world, we're starting to see more and more schools and school systems devote more time to social and emotional skills development. But school is not, however, the only opportunity that exists for helping young people develop social and emotional learning. And a lot of our time together over the next 2 hours will be about us learning from amazing work from around the world that creates conditions that allows young people to develop social and emotional skills outside of school. It feels as if there is an increasing amount of momentum behind social and emotional learning at the moment. That idea of nothing being more powerful than an idea whose time has come is starting to feel more and more true with regards to SEL. And in this respect, and in many others, the OECD study is absolutely brilliantly timed. Karanga, the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills, did a piece of social media analysis last year during the pandemic, which looked at the frequency with which social and emotional learning and variant terms were mentioned across different English language social media platforms throughout the course of the year. What Karanga was interested in looking at was there a spike in interest when schools were shut down and there was more discussion around the purpose of education? And that was absolutely the case. Throughout the course of the year, peaking in the summer, you see a really significant increase in discussion and reference to these terms. And then when schools reopened in the autumn in many parts of the world, the frequency with which SEL was being discussed on social media did tail off, but at the end of the year, it was still significantly higher than it was at the beginning of the year. And the publication of the OECD study now provides really fresh momentum and interest in this topic. We've seen this momentum in lots of new programs that have become possible at Salzburg Global Seminar. Social and emotional skills are integral to new multi-year programs for education policymakers that we do in partnership with the LEGO Foundation. In our new Whole Child Development for Displaced Learners network, which is launching later this week, that we're doing in partnership with Portugus, in our work around education leadership, and the conference series and ebook Education Disrupted, Education Reimagined, that we worked on with WISE last year, through Karanga, the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills that we've helped incubate and which grew out of a number of our SEL programs in 2018 and 2019. And we've really been able to focus on social and emotional learning at all over the last few years because of the support of key partners, and in particular, Qatar Foundation International and Microsoft, who've been partners in and have supported the Education for Tomorrow's World series since 2017, and the Education Testing Service, ETS, who we've been lucky to work with on education programs for more than a decade. Now, what's happening now is the first of two programs that we're organizing today in partnership with ETS and QFI and Microsoft, and with the involvement of OECD and Andreas and many other great speakers. And I'm really looking forward to both of these conversations. So the format for this morning will be in a minute, Andrea Schleicher, the Director of the Directorate of Education and Skills at OECD, will give a presentation sharing first findings from the OECD study. And we'll then move into a panel discussion. And joining Andreas on the panel will be Laura Biancalani, who's the president of the Andrea Bocelli Foundation in Italy, Karima Kadaoui, who's the co-founder and executive president of Tamkeen Community Foundation for Human Development in Morocco, and Marko Kasic, who's the managing director of FundLife, an NGO based in the Philippines. Please feel free to post questions and comments in the chat. When we get to the panel discussion, I will try and bring in as many of those questions as possible. Please feel free to engage with each other on the chat, share resources or examples that you think are useful and that you would like to share with other people. Each of the speakers are going to be talking about their work, but they'll also be offering ideas and approaches and ways of thinking that we really hope can be replicated and scaled in other contexts as well. We all have the opportunity to be changed by things that we experience online, by these kinds of webinar formats. And I really hope that everyone joining today will be able to take some really valuable lessons and ideas away that they'll be able to bring to their own work around social and emotional learning. So without any further introduction, it gives me enormous pleasure to invite Andrea Schleicher to the virtual stage and to share some of the amazing findings from the study. So Andreas, over to you, please.
Thanks so much, Dominic, and thank you also for your leadership in this field. You know, as you say, now after the pandemic, everybody is talking about social emotional skills and social emotional learning, but you've really led this field for many years. You've also made a compelling case for why social emotional skills are so important. And I think that is something that we should now take for granted. In fact, we ask ourselves those questions more than for other subjects like, you know, mathematics and science and so on. But I think it still leaves us with some important question. The first is, can those skills be learned? Some people argue, well, these are just some personality traits, you know, there's nothing that you can do about it. And if they can be learned, can they be taught? Is there a role for schools in this? And then lastly, can they be measured? It's always hard to improve and change what you can't observe, what you can't measure. And I hope you leave this webinar with a clear answer to those questions. I think we can now really show that those are skills that we can develop and that they can be measured and compared. So I'm going to show you some slides on this. And the first, I just want to sort of highlight the world in which we live and which, in a way, our education systems have contributed to. It's a world of disconnects. Now we have, a growing growth imperative in our economies, and we see more clearly than ever that the resources of our planet are finite. We have a disconnect between the financial economy and the real economy, between the wealthy and the poor, between our idea of a gross domestic product through which we measure success in our societies and the actual well-being of people. Now we have a disconnect between technology, what's possible with technologies, and the actual social needs of people. Now we have a disconnect between the way we run our countries and the perceived voicelessness of people often. And we have, as a way sort of to bind all of this together, the SDGs that could be the missing piece in this globalization puzzle and hold us together. And in this context, we are right in the pandemic or just getting out of it now. But one point I just want to highlight is that the future will always surprise us. If you look forward, climate change is going to disrupt our lives a lot more than this pandemic. Artificial intelligence is going to put really to a test what makes us human. And again, this is where social emotional skills are already coming in. Our education systems are good to educate second-class robots often. People are good at repeating what we have told them. But we live in a world where the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, have also become easy to digitize, to automate. We need to ask ourselves this question more and more. How do we complement the artificial intelligence we created in our computer? What are those human dimensions? But if I come back once more to the kind of global agenda around us, when you ask school principals, and we did that in our last PISA assessment, to what extent those issues are embedded in our school curricula, you get actually a very positive picture. You can see in 9 out of 10 cases, yes, climate change and global warming is something that is part of our school agenda, or, gender equality, international conflicts, causes of poverty, all those issues that are confronting society. There's something that schools are doing about it. But when you actually ask students questions around this, you can see on the one hand also here, looking after the global environment is really important to me. This is an agenda that is urgent and important for young people. But when you ask them, can you do something about this? Do you think your behavior can actually impact on people in other places, in other countries? You can see the bars get a lot shorter, and that is the crux of our education. That actually we create a lot of awareness, a lot of knowledge, but actually that capacity to mobilize cognitive, social, and emotional resources is often, as a missing. And that sense of student agency is really what this future of education is about. Before I talk about our new survey, I just want to show one metric that illustrates this well. In our last PISA assessment, we surveyed something that we call the growth mindset. Basically, that idea that students have access to the resources to grow beyond their limit. And you can see when you look on the vertical axis, the cognitive outcomes, the academic outcomes of education. In this case, it's, literacy performance. And you look on the horizontal axis, that growth mindset, you can see that countries line up pretty well. Countries like Estonia that are very, very good in fostering a student growth mindset are also top performers on the PISA assessment. In countries like Indonesia, where the majority of students believe that, success is about the intelligence I was born with, there's nothing I can do about it. They're also not particularly successful academically. And it's not just about academic success. You can see basically students with a growth mindset were more motivated to master difficult tasks. They had a greater sense of self-efficacy. They were less afraid of failure. Now, and once again, in our societies, and if you want young people to be imaginative, creative, you need to give them, room to experiment and to sort of take risks and to make mistakes. And this capacity of young people to actually take that risk, to, use those spaces, to learn from and with failure, is very, very closely related to that growth mindset that you could put into the kind of social emotional space. And also those students were more likely to establish more ambitious learning goals and actually see even greater value in learning, in schooling. So suddenly you can see how the difference between the academic and the social emotional skills is actually not that great. So that's what we basically looked at in our new survey. We measured skills such as task performance, think about the responsibility, self-control, or persistence. We looked at self-management, particularly stress resistance, optimism among people. We looked at open-mindedness, including curiosity and creativity, at social skills, at sociability. And we also looked at related outcomes like achievement, motivation, self-efficacy. And as Dominic just highlighted, we know that employers value many of those skills, and they are crucial building blocks also of our societies. We collected a lot of data from students, from parents, from teachers and school principals to contextualize the results. That was very important for us to answer that question. How and where can those skills actually be developed? And this is where we collected our data from. We focused the survey not on countries, but on cities, because cities are often places where all of those issues are highly concentrated. And we can find a lot of commonality between cities, even if the countries may be quite remote in terms of their cultures and other frameworks. So it's a good cross-section. And that was important to us, that we have covered a range of cultures to see to what extent those metrics actually make sense across different contexts. We surveyed about 3,000 students in each of these cities or regions, and at the age of 10 and at the age of 15. It was also important to us that we are not just focusing on one kind of cohort, but that we have two perspectives, younger and primary schooling,
Andreas, you've frozen temporarily, I hope. Hopefully, Andreas will be able to reconnect in a minute or two. It's an excellent opportunity, though, for people to be able to post questions or thoughts and reflections on the first part of Andreas's presentation in the chat here. It would also be excellent to learn more about where you are all joining from and the contexts in which you're working. So thank you to those who've already shared some of that information. Andreas was just talking about why they decided to focus the study, this particular study, on cities rather than at the national level. And so to hear from those of you who are working in rural or urban contexts would be really interesting, and also about the kind of programs that you're involved with. think there's a really interesting comment from Laura Garcia del Campo about the application of social and emotional learning in hospital contexts. And for those who are joining from, whose work is outside of education, whether that's formal or non-formal, it would also be really interesting to hear more about those programs, particularly if there's literature that you found particularly useful or illuminating, which is about the application of social and emotional skills in context outside of the classroom. That would be very relevant for the discussion that we're going to have today. So we will definitely be coming to a part of Andreas's presentation which looks at how social and emotional learning can be taught. We'll also be using a lot of the time today to focus on extracurricular programs and content. Andreas, welcome back. Sorry,
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to my internet connection. I don't even know where I lost you.
You were just talking about why you had focused the study at the level of the city rather than at national level.
Okay. Good. Sorry for that. My apologies. I just need to get back in the presentation, and let me just.
Great, thank you.
Get back to this, and I'm going straight to the results. And the first I wanted to show you is really this very strong link between social emotional skills and also academic performance, more traditional learning outcomes. You can see that students with same demographics and the same cognitive abilities who have stronger social emotional skills actually were a lot more likely to obtain better grades. And among 15-year-olds, that was one of the target groups, you find a strong relationship between persistence and better grades in mathematics. And that was true across all jurisdictions for which we measured data. You can see that students indicating more trust did also do better in mathematics. And the strongest predictor of mathematics grades was curiosity. And these findings highlight that it's not just important to emphasize dedication in school, but also cultivating an intellectual curiosity. Now, of course, external forces like parents' expectations and teacher expectations can be very important. I don't want to sort of make this look less important, but the pandemic has shown us how important it is that students can learn on their own, that they can manage themselves, that they can, grades, creativity and sociability. We'll come back to that later on. And then it's not just about mathematics. You can find a very similar picture when you look at the arts. So there is a strong relationship across the jurisdictions between social emotional skills and the kind of traditional school grades, academic performance. Let's have a look at, how those skills interact with student demographics. And the first and really striking finding is that 15-year-olds, and that is irrespective of their gender and social background, reported consistently lower social emotional skills than 10-year-old counterparts. That was the other population that we measured. You can see that in every skill category, the bars go down. And people just notice this, but imagine, we would see that in mathematics, students in middle school do worse in mathematics than they did in primary school. We would ask ourselves, what's going on here? I know that there are many explanations for this. Now, some say, well, the kind of student growth contributes to this. Students go through a difficult phase in their adulthood, and that's why, those results are more challenging there. And that may be true, but then, again, we should ask ourselves, what do we do in schooling? What do parents do, teachers do, schools do, to actually help schools in that difficult phase? And so we need to be aware of those kinds of patterns. And what's also striking when you break this down by gender, the drop in social emotional skills is much steeper for girls than it is for boys as they grow from 10 to 15-year-olds. You see there shaded downward bars for girls tend to be much longer. Tolerance and assertiveness seem to be the only exception to this pattern. And once again, we should be aware of those relationships. Now, even, if they go beyond the educational aspects, the schooling context certainly can and should do something about it. So let's have a little bit more of a look at gender here. First of all, in the previous slide, I showed you how skills change for boys and girls as they grow older. But here you see also the difference in how boys and girls rate their social emotional skills. When the bars go up, girls do better. When the bars go down, boys do better. And what you can see here is that girls reported higher skills related to task performance, like responsibility, achievement, motivation. You see the bars going up. They also reported higher levels of skills that are important in an interconnected world. Dominic, you highlighted empathy. That's something where girls consistently do better, cooperation, tolerance. But, there are other areas where you can see boys showed higher social emotional skills, like emotional regulation, stress resistance, optimism, emotional control, also assertiveness, energy, clearly also important dimensions. And think about it, in science, education has done well actually to close the gender gap. We barely see, significant gender differences among boys and girls when it comes to science performance. But social emotional skills, actually, they are quite important. And when you look at this at age 15, the bars tend to get longer. So once again, this is not something that is going away, that seems to sort of be more pronounced as students grow older. So important gender differences. The other dimension is, of course, is social context. You can see very clearly that in every system and for every skill category, socially, economically advantaged students reported higher social emotional skills than their disadvantaged peers. And again, that holds for every city. And there could be many explanations for this. It's possible that these results are due to parents from more advantaged backgrounds just putting greater emphasis on the importance of social emotional skills. They know that those are very important for achieving success in life, so they get that message to their children. And parents from more advantaged backgrounds also can often make greater investments, in the kind of activities that foster social emotional skills. But the bottom line is there are very significant kind of gaps in this. Students from more disadvantaged backgrounds often have also many other things going on. And once again, if we see those kinds of gaps, what are we doing about it? And what's interesting actually is that the gaps are larger often for younger students. That's where we can intervene more pronounced. As I already said, these are patterns that are quite consistent across the cities, but you can see also, some interesting departures from this. And that shows, that geography is an important dimension. It's not that, these are inevitable trends that happen in every system, every school in the same way. No, there seem to be quite distinct patterns. And that's something I could have shown you that for every other skill category as well, that those things vary. I've already highlighted that social emotional skills decline between the ages of 10 and 15. But what you can see here, this decline is much larger for students from more advantaged backgrounds than among students from disadvantaged backgrounds, here marked by the shaded bars. So again, perhaps school can do something to foster greater social equity. Let's give a sort of special emphasis to creativity and curiosity. These are two skills that are highly valued in societies that very much depend on innovation and social progress. And first of all, the survey shows that students who think of themselves as highly creative tend to also report higher levels of other social emotional skills, including intellectual curiosity and persistence. Two skills that play a very clearly important role in creative achievements. So that is also very important, that those skills are interrelated among themselves. What the causal nature of those relationships is not something you can see from these results, but there is this kind of interconnectedness between creativity, curiosity, and many other dimensions. I want to come back once more to this issue that those kind of skills decline between the age of 10 and 15. And you can see I had already, shown you that in general, but now I break this down actually by the different jurisdictions. And you can see that trend is visible in every jurisdictions, but in some more pronounced than elsewhere. You look, for example, here is issue in China. 10-year-olds actually doing quite well on creativity at age 15. They dropped very significant. Daegu in Korea, Ottawa in Canada. They're all places where you can see 10-year-olds seem to be more creative than their 15-year-old counterparts. And once again, there could be, developmental factors behind it. There could be things that are outside the control of educators. But still, we should ask ourselves, what do we do to counter those kinds of tendencies? It could well be that education makes a contribution to this. Small children are highly creative. If you have, a 3-year-old son or daughter, they're going to question everything you say. They challenge everything you do. They experiment with everything that gets into their way. Children are born with an abundance of curiosity and creativity. But then in education, we try to make them compliant with, established ways of thinking, established ways of working, and maybe we take some of that energy away. Maybe school contributes to the fact. And so it's important that this is not just reflected in the student data that we have, but also the ratings for parents in most countries, and teachers gave a similar picture. So this is something this seems to be something that also parents and teachers can observe in this drop in creativity. So once again, we should ask ourselves, what can we do to reverse those patterns? And also here, age-related differences in creative self-concept are much more pronounced among girls than boys. Now, for most cities in creativity, the results flip from girls doing better among 10-year-olds, here marked in blue, to boys doing better among 15-year-olds in yellow. And for curiosity, the advantage of girls shrinks very substantially. So again, there's a general drop between age 10 and 15, but you can see for girls that drop is also here more pronounced. What is interesting also is that parents and teachers ratings are actually quite similar for boys and girls in both groups. So teachers and parents observed similar declines for boys and girls, while girls themselves report larger declines in creativity and curiosity as they grow older. It's quite possible that this pattern is due to boys who are overconfident, in their creative skills, and girls being sort of more realistic in their evaluations. But if young people growing up associate creative talent with men more than women, then that may have implications on the occupational choices and other factors of people. So we should take those findings seriously. Now, what can schools do when you look at activities that we often associate with creativity and curiosity, such as sports? You can see they tend to be more prevalent among 10-year-olds here on the left side than among 15-year-olds here on the right side. And the picture is quite similar for the arts. Young children have more space for those kinds of initiatives, whereas older children, have less opportunity. School makes them very busy, often with other things. So that's something, important to observe. And, I made this hypothesis that arts and sports are things that foster creativity and curiosity, but it's actually good data to support it. You can see here that students participating in art activities report consistently higher levels of creativity here on the left side and curiosity on the right side. And again, that's consistent across jurisdictions. The intensity of arts activities being positively related with creativity and curiosity. For sports, the bars become less pronounced, but are still, I think, quite clearly visible. So you might think that arts and sports take time away from things like math and science, but they seem to add something when it comes to social emotional skills. And as you saw before, they actually even add something to traditional math grades. This is this interconnectedness that is so important. Social relations in school. Now let's move from skills to social relations in school. The survey shows that students' sense of fitting in at school and the quality of student-teacher relations are consistently and positively related to social emotional skills. And you can see that the majority of students said they feel they belong at school. But it's also noteworthy that, you know, for most of the questions that we ask, you have about a quarter of students where that was not the case. They don't feel they belong at school. They don't make friends easily. They feel lonely, and so on. And once again, it makes a big difference. Students who feel they belong at school show higher levels of social emotional skills, and that's true again across all skill categories. You know, cause and effect are not so clear to discern, but there seems that relationship, that the sense of belonging is, you know, very closely related to social emotional skills. The counterpart, obviously, at the opposite end, you have things like bullying. And that is also something that is quite visible here. You can see the picture for 15-year-olds. Bullying levels, particularly psychological bullying, more prevalent among boys than among girls. And then you look at 10-year-olds, the bars get a lot longer. And you can suddenly see this is not just a very small minority, but you can see actually, you know, in every class, you do have, you know, students probably on average. And as you would expect, students' sense of belonging at school relates positively to social emotional skills. Students who are bullied tend to report much lower social emotional skills. That's something I think that will not surprise us. On a positive note, you can also see that most students report good relationships with their teachers. It's a little bit less pronounced among students from disadvantaged backgrounds. We don't know why. It could be that, you know, those students just have a harder life in general and therefore have maybe less trustful relationships with their teachers. Or it could be that in disadvantaged schools, there are teachers who cannot or will not devote as much of their time to building those relationships. We do not know, but the pattern is quite consistent. But overall, I would say the bars are quite long, so most students report quite positive relationships with their teacher. And once again, you can see that makes a huge difference. Students who get along well with their teachers reported higher social emotional skills, particularly greater curiosity, greater optimism, greater achievement motivation. Curiosity and achievement motivation both indicate that love for learning and doing well at school. So it seems that students who get along well with their teachers are more engaged. They want to do well in school. They want to learn more. And to the extent that you can see a causal relationship in this pattern, and here it's probably more plausible, improving social emotional skills could be a way to help students, you know, and enjoy better relations in school and vice versa. So let's, that brings us to this idea of student well-being that we looked at as well, particularly some of the dimensions relating to this. And overall, students seem to be quite satisfied with their life, although more among 10-year-olds, that's the first group of bars here, than among 15-year-olds, here shown in the lower group of bars. And also you can see, but also here, you know, there is a significant minority of students in all jurisdictions who are just moderately satisfied with their lives, or not at all. And note also that the variation across jurisdictions is quite strong. Students in Manisolas seem to be more satisfied with their lives than students in Ottawa, for example. Now, among the social emotional skills that we measured, optimism seems a great predictor for life satisfaction in all jurisdictions. Now you can see the dark purple bar showing a particularly strong relationship with life satisfaction. But we also see stress resistance, trust, relating positively to students' life satisfaction. The World Health Organization has an interesting metric to assess the psychological well-being of students, which we use here for 10-year-olds. You can see a generally positive picture, although you can see also there consistently lower results for girls than for boys again. Psychological well-being dips again in adolescence. The bars are generally shorter for 15-year-olds than for 10-year-olds, and that dip again is more pronounced for girls than for boys. And the results also show here that students' social and emotional skills are closely related to students' psychological well-being after accounting for socioeconomic status and gender. And that's particularly true, as you can see here, for stress resistance, for optimism and energy. Now, let me conclude with one piece that gets a lot of attention and that is very much discussed in the public these days, and this is student anxiety. Here in the case with tests, I look in particularly at the difference between boys and girls and at those between age groups. Now, there's a significant share of girls, particularly older ones, who feel anxious doing tests, even if they're well prepared. That's the interesting part. Girls generally do better on those tests. They also feel a greater sense of preparation, and still they feel a greater level of anxiety. And if the demands from school and parents are the same for boys and girls, now why do students from disadvantaged social backgrounds and girls also seem to experience greater anxiety? And you can actually see when you relate test anxiety to the well-being index that I first explained, you can line up cities quite well. Here you can see the results for girls. Now, greater, the more sort of anxious students are at particular kind of jurisdictions, the lower the sense of well-being. And the same is true for boys, also at consistently lower levels of anxiety, but the pattern is quite consistent. Now, some people might say, well, you know, that's simply due to basically too much academic pressure on students that makes students anxious. It's not something that we observe in the data. You can see, for example, systems like Daegu in Korea or Sichu that were actually, you know, there's a lot of academic expectations. You can see the well-being is not so bad in those systems, whereas some other systems with lower expectations often show much poorer results. So this is not so much about the academic pressure. It has a lot more to do with the level of perceived support that students actually experience. And you can also hear that the learning environment and school climate matter. We don't see much of a relationship between school climate and life satisfaction, but you can see that for 10-year-olds, a competitive school climate, high expectations from parents, and also from teachers are strongly related to greater psychological well-being. The pattern is less pronounced for 15-year-olds. But for both age groups, you can also see that competition and expectations are a greater predictor for test anxiety. So getting that balance right is so crucially important. And you can see how those factors play out differently in different jurisdictions. That shows us actually that these are things that, you know, we should take to heart, that we can deal with. That's really all I wanted to share with you. I think all of this underlines why it is so important that education systems strive for a holistic development of their students. Now, that is more than academic skills. It recognizes the importance of social emotional skills. And you can see we can observe, and we can observe them like we can observe mathematics and science. We can observe patterns by geography, by gender, by social background. And once we observe them, we can address them in school policy and practice. Thank you very much.
Andreas, thank you so much for that fantastically rich presentation. There's an enormous amount for us all to reflect on and learn from. And it feels like there is data that will be being mined for many, many years to come from this survey. It was particularly interesting, I think, the focus that you gave to the role of arts, to the role of sports, and also to relationships for developing and retaining social and emotional skills, because those three areas are in many ways central to the areas of focus for the three guest speakers who are going to be joining us now for the panel discussion. Laura, Marko and Karima, if you wouldn't mind turning your cameras on and coming onto the virtual stage. So Laura Biancalani is the president of the Andrea Bocelli Foundation. The foundation does many, many different things around the world, but for the purposes of our conversation today, Laura is going to focus mainly on programs that they run that use arts and music to help young people develop a wide range of skills. Marko Kasic is the CEO of FundLife, which is an NGO in the Philippines that uses the transformative power of play to deliver sustainable social impact and provide education pathways. For today, Marko is going to mainly focus on sports programs that FundLife runs and develops. And then Karima Kadaoui is the co-founder and executive president of Tamkeen Community Foundation for Human Development based in Morocco. Tamkeen co-creates projects with communities in order to help individuals fulfill their full potential and has a particular focus on changing and supporting positive relationships within those communities. So the format is going to be, I'm going to ask each of the three of them a short opening question so that they can answer the question and introduce some aspects of their work. We'll then go back to Andreas if he wants to comment or link anything that has been said to specific points in the report, in the OECD report, and we'll then move into a general conversation. Andreas will be with us for about the first half hour of that, and then the final section will be with Laura, Marko, and Karima. So please continue to post questions in the chat, and we will try to get through as many of them as possible. But Laura, if I could begin with you, if that's okay. So the Andrea Bocelli Foundation is most well known, I think, for the work that you do using arts and music to help young people with their personal development. I would love to learn more about specific ways in which you see your programs helping young people develop and refine social and emotional skills, please.
Okay, thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Andreas, for your interesting presentation. I would like to introduce the work of Andrea Bocelli Foundation. Andrea Bocelli Foundation was established 10 years ago by the Bocelli family and has since grown into an independent non-profit led by world-class professionals that oversee the strategic development of key projects. The foundation core mission is to empower people and communities in situation of poverty, illiteracy, distress due to illness and social exclusion. Our primary focus is developing education projects that leverage music, arts, and new technologies as an additional tool for social inclusion and talent development, all in line with the United Nations 2030 Agenda, goal number 4.7. We do this by promoting and supporting national and international projects that encourage the overcoming of barriers and expression of individuals' full potential. We are working from the beginning on social and emotional skills of the young people and kids with music and arts program in Italy and in some developing countries like in Haiti. Specifically, through our work in educational space, we have built 9 schools in Italy and in Haiti that offer daily access to a world-class education to over 3,500 students. So in all our schools, we are working with arts and music and digital language. As Maestro Bocelli said many times, a school without the languages of music and arts is not a school. Indeed, we believe these are languages that are not only important to develop future artists, but more broadly to foster creativity and contributing to the development of a full, well-rounded human being. As such, all the educational projects we develop have a strong attention to inserting, monitoring, and continuously developing innovative music and arts educational programs in close collaboration with teachers who are doing the on-the-ground work on a daily basis. For example, the newest ABF schools have been carefully studied using a model in which these 2 languages and digital ones find a dedicated space in which we take care of the space dimension, time, and relationships. I would love to describe at first one of our program. His name is Voices of the World. In the late 2019, we were really proud to launch Voices of the World as a program that aims to scale up psychosocial support for disadvantaged children and youth in vulnerable regions that include places like Haiti and Palestine. This is the global evolution of the Voices of Haiti, a 3-year pilot project founded in 2016. And I would like to pray Dominic to post a video in which better than with my words we describe our 3 years pilot project. And we try to create a best practice, a replicable methodology, and has received widespread global attention. The project introduced music in education in 30 schools supported by our local partner, Fondation Saint-Luc, reaching around 12,000 students. ABF at the end of a year selected the 60 of the most talented boys and girls. I would like to underline that talented boys and girls is not means good at music and that's it. We are looking for some leader in the communities in a lot of sense, and we have multidisciplinary team of the teachers, psychologists, and pedagogists and pedagogic people in Haiti and in Italy that works to select these 60 kids aged 9-15, which provide the tools necessary to stimulate creativity and personal growth, to work on team building, and to develop leadership program. The students participated in activities that include weekly half-day workshop comprised of lessons, rehearsal, music education, leadership program, team building, and a emotive intelligence program, playtime, and even meals there. Through a well-rounded after-school empowerment program, the chorus itself became so well integrated and developed that it traveled with Maestro Bocelli to perform in our aspiring settings such as a United Nations General Assembly in 2016. And they sang also in the Vatican and in a lot of places in Italy in the years after. The personal transformation witnessed over the years for children and their immediate communities had exceeded expectations and has driven ABF in the power of the strategic approach. We are looking for the next phase of the development of Voices of the World program, which unfortunately has been placed on hold because of the pandemic travel restriction. But we are sure that this program is so strategic to develop more social skills of boys and girls. It's amazing to see how these boys and girls makes the difference inside the slums, because all these kids come from the slums. And so they visited US, they visited Italy, they stay with other boys and girls from different background and gender, age, and they come back home not frustrated, but with a dream, developing creativity and a different future for their country. So we hope to start again to spread in the world music, because we are sure that music and art can be a key to develop social and emotional skills. So this is one of our projects, but Dominic will share with you also other projects and other model of space of school in which music and arts are the key in Italy. And I will write to all of you my email, so I'm available anytime to answer to your question after the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and I've shared the links that you sent in the chat already for people to save to watch in the future. They're fantastic videos about the work, and I think there is something really compelling and exciting, isn't there, about the idea that organizing choirs or group singing opportunities, or the opportunity to make music together, provides all sorts of additional benefits around social and emotional skills development, and also around community, into developing a sense of community and the relationships within that. So it's going to be really interesting to speak more with you about that later on this morning. What I would love to do now, if it's okay, is move on to Marko. and bring you into the conversation, because Andreas also talked about, you know, the importance that sport can play in helping young people develop these kinds of skills. And sport is a big focus of FundLife's work. So, you know, you work in many ways outside of formal education and with some very poor communities in the Philippines. But I would love to learn more about FundLife's approach and specifically the role that you see sport playing in helping young people with issues around empowerment and motivation.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you, Lara and Andreas, for that very compelling and fascinating insight. As somebody who's been working in this space, as Dominic mentioned, through a very informal lens for the last 7 or 8 years, we definitely see that social emotional learning isn't really considered in many of the educational discussions, and often we've tended to use the term life skills, or more recently 21st century skills. So I think it's a timely discussion, and obviously looking forward to unpacking more of that that report that you shared. And just to begin, I think the origins of FundLife and my own involvement in this space are quite unique in that it came from that sense of disconnect and feeling helplessness in terms of I grew up in the UK most of my life. I came to the Philippines for a professional engagement for 6 months, and when I arrived I was completely blown away by the very visceral inequality, the disconnect between the wealthy and the not so wealthy, and there was an overwhelming sense of helplessness in terms of what do you do, how do you attack this problem, because it's systematic, it's structural poverty more than anything. These children from a very young age, all they see is it's intergenerational. Their parents have grown up in poverty, and they've almost lost hope in the traditional education system. Schools are underfunded, teachers are under-resourced, underpaid. So there's a complete breakdown of traditional education to really move up the social ladder. And really, I spent about 6 months in Manila, and I started volunteering because I played football in the UK, and I tried to get back into it in the Philippines. And I just got by chance connected to a very tiny NGO using sports as a way to reach slum children in Manila. And within 2 hours, I was completely captivated just at the results that I saw. Within 2 hours of these kids, you had 8, 9-year-olds who were living in shanty towns, you know, 10 children sharing one room. And they had this abundance of life and confidence speaking English to foreigners who typically they would never connect with. And it just completely changed my outlook at what's possible. And really, as I said, everything started organically. I started volunteering for this NGO, and over the course of those first 6 months in the Philippines, we really started to understand the potential that sports has. And I think for us with FundLife over the last 7 years, we've understood 2 core things that come through sports. Yes, personally, it creates a sense of teamwork, discipline, hard work. These are all the things that these children that we work with don't typically see because they're living constantly in a survival mentality. But more than that, it gave them a sense of worth and belonging. And I think once you start with that foundation where you give them an identity of who they are, they have something to be part of. It's something they've never had, especially when you're working with children from as young as 8 or 9. And so once we establish that sense of belonging and rapport with the children, we started creating an educational curriculum around champions, using the stories of famous sportsmen and women who also started from a very similar position as some of these children, and really unpacking their lives. So reverse engineering how these champions came to be. There's a very famous boxer from the Philippines, Manny Pacquiao, who when he was 8 or 9 years old, he was too poor where he couldn't eat rice. And so a lot of these children, they're very much living in that same sense of helplessness. And so we simply unpack the stories of how famous sportsmen who and women who started from very little got to where they were. And it's not about creating a sense of sporting achievement. It's actually just creating a set of positive values and traits where children can have a pathway which simply consists of committing to something, sticking to it, and really trying to have someone who's accountable to them to make sure they're doing those tasks. And so for us, the FundLife model around sports, it's a very simplistic but structured program where we work with communities 2 times a week offering sports. Once a week, we do classroom sessions, and we also create mentorship with young leaders in their community. So there is actually a champion for these children in the community who they can rely on. And really, that simplistic approach has led us to have quite astounding success in the last 6 years. We now work with the Ministry of Education. Before COVID, we were working in 20 public schools where on average the dropout rate of adolescents was somewhere between 16 to 21%. And out of all the children who were enrolled in our sports academy program, we were able to reduce that to less than 1%. And so the impact and the outcomes are there, but beyond keeping kids in school, it's about creating a sense that these children can really figure out what their potential is, trying to figure out what they can offer outside of formal education, and then creating pathways to helping them achieve their ambitions. And sport is really the first step. It's not the culmination, but I think, as Andreas pointed out, you saw that children who are 10, they have access to sports a lot more. There's a sense of creativity, a sense of anything is possible. And the longer they stay in this system that teaches them that unless they have all the opportunities that really education offers, they won't be successful. So I think for us, it's getting them at those formative years between 8 and 11, and then working with them and creating those pathways.
Great, thank you, Marko. I think referencing back to like you just said, referencing back to the OECD study, and maybe one of the factors, and this has come up in the chat a little bit as well, is that the curriculum becomes more and more crowded as children get older in school and stay into their teenage years. And so it increases the importance of programs like yours and like the kind of thing that Laura was talking about, these extracurricular outside of school opportunities that can help young people continue to develop these skills. And the more interventions that communities and societies can offer that can help address the kind of tail off in self-reported social and emotional competence between 10 and 15, the more valuable it will be for society down the line, I think. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, and we will come back to many of the themes that you mentioned in our discussion in a minute. I'd now love to invite Karima Kadaoui to make some opening remarks, if that's okay. Karima, thank you very much for being with us this morning. So Karima is the co-founder and executive president of an organization called Tamkeen Community Foundation for Human Development. Karima, I know that you see many of the sort of social and emotional skills that Andreas and Laura and Marko have been talking about, as being at the very core of what it means to be human. And that one of the challenges that we need to address with formal education is, ways in which these have been lost or taken away from us because of the societies and the systems in which we all grow up in and live. So I would love to learn more about how Tamkeen's approach helps communities regain that space and then goes on to create conditions for human flourishing.
Very much, Dominic. I'm so delighted to be here with Laura, Marko, and Andreas, and to hear this report. I was just imagining my 10-year-old self listening to the conclusions of this report, and I would say yes, because we have really grown an extraordinary expertise, which is to dehumanize our context, our human context in which we evolve, in which our lives are supposed to unfold. And schools are such an extraordinary example of that. I will start by describing a scene. We were in Dar Marifa community house in the neighborhood in the outskirts of Tangier. There were children, there were mothers, there were young people, and at that time our partners were there also to meet the community. That was in 2017, 2018. And one young man shared with us, he said, we were in the cafe yesterday with other young men, and we were talking about something that happened in the neighborhood, violence. And we were talking about it in a way that was very different. And we suddenly reflected, why are we talking about this in such a different way? And they said, we realized that for almost 2 years, we haven't experienced violence. Whereas before it was an expectation for it to be daily. And then we said, but what has happened in our neighborhood? They said, the people are the same, the streets are the same, the houses are the same. Nothing has changed, yet everything has changed. The relationship has changed. Said before we were able, we used to come together to fight the next door neighborhoods. So we would define an objective, a strategy, the resources needed, distribute the tasks. Violence used to bring us together. Today, love brings us together. And we realized, and this is what struck me, and we realized that all these community initiatives that we have co-created over the years were nothing but an excuse to remain together. Complete shift of what is important, what matters, what has value in our community. That was deeply moving. When the mothers from another neighborhood came to meet the neighborhood, because they were at the school and they saw the children from that neighborhood at the school performing, singing. They came to meet the families in the neighborhood, and our facilitators, the Tamkeen facilitators were there. And they were describing a scene that was quite amazing. You'd have the mothers from other neighborhoods and meeting the mothers from this neighborhood, and the children were there, and the mothers were saying to the facilitators, we want our children to be like the children of Hey Zwitina. Zwitina means the olive tree neighborhood. And then the children said, of Hey Zwitina, said, look at your children first. Look at what your children already do. And that was amazing, because it was a recognition that whatever we do, you can do. Or furthermore, whatever we do, and we went on stage and did it, you probably do, but maybe no one gave you a stage to do it. So how did all this process happen? How did it happen that the directors of the school and the teachers of the school come to the community house to say, we are so surprised by these children, the way they express themselves. They are co-creating clubs in the school, and they are telling us that they're co-creating clubs in their neighborhood. Music clubs, sports clubs. So how did this all happen? Well, it happened because we met. We met in a deeply human relationship. We wanted to know them. We wanted to meet the community, not because they were lacking something, but because they had already community initiatives that they did not see as valuable. And Tamkeen is a community foundation for human development. The very reason we exist is that sense of community. So we wanted to meet them and ask them questions about their initiatives. When we'd meet the children in the neighborhood, they would tell us, come and see what we do. And they would prepare art, theater, a play, or football match. And we'd just be there, watching, appreciating, asking questions, sharing our own stories while they were sharing our own stories. Actually, what happened is a mirror. The mirror changed. And when the mirror changes, our self-perception changes. And when our self-perception changes, well, everything changes. And when I reconnect with that sense of self, and the sense of self that I am not what I possess materially, I am not what I possess intellectually or culturally, but I am a human being, and that has value. It's not what I produce that gives me value, it's what I am, who I am as a human being. When we have that kind of connection, everything changes, yet nothing has changed. We had the director of a school telling us something with Tamkeen. We found the chemical formula for something that is magical. We have humanized our school. The whole ecology of a school changes. What has changes? The resources did not change. The same curriculum, the same teachers, the same school, 3,000 student school, known as probably one of the toughest school in the neighborhood, in the region. What has changed? The relationship. We meet as human beings, not behind roles. We don't shield ourselves. So in terms of socio-emotional learning, well, isn't it really about learning to be what we are? Don't we have this extraordinary ability to throw sand into our children's eyes, and then we'll tell them, we're going to teach you how to see, and then we're going to measure how well you see. This process is starting to diffuse into the education system. What we do in Tamkeen, we facilitate self-facilitation. Neighborhood transforming themselves, seeing the light. Schools transforming themselves. The school director came to the community house in Heisvitina, in the neighborhood, the Olive Tree neighborhood, and he told them, how can our school become Dar Merifa, the house of recognition? Today it is. As you said, Marko, a sense of belonging. Learned helplessness, because helplessness we learn becomes learned optimism. We are no longer defined by where we're born and who we are. But because we have a project, we have an idea, we come together to co-create it. New free traits of character are liberated. And I refer here to Dr. Brian Little. And then we have young people saying, oh, I did not know I was like that. But it's actually the whole family who starts saying, we did not know we were like that. And the whole community. And then communities meet and mirror that to one another. So when a community, members of a community go to the community, they don't say, go and see Tamkeen. They say, we'll share our story, but you will do it your own way. So what is Tamkeen? Tamkeen, if you go back to the root of the word Tamkeen, which is an Arabic word and often translated as empowerment, whereas it's not empowerment, it's a semantic field. It's a semantic field. In its root we have imkan, potential. We have mumkin, possible, imkania, possibility, mekan, makin, the safe place, just as a womb, the mother's womb. So we learn together to co-create these safe places where we can express the humanity that defines us and connects us. And that transcends us into the eminence of our creativity. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Karima, for sharing all of that and about the importance of positive relationships. I think something really interesting which connects all three of your areas of work, or a couple of things that struck me when each of you were talking was, one about the emphasis they place on developing a sense of community, whether that is community through a choir or an orchestra or through a sports team, or actually at the level of community with Tamkeen's work, and the value this has for social and emotional skills development. The second area I think that connects your work is around the emphasis you all place on developing a sense of agency and empowerment in the beneficiaries of your programs. And there is some really interesting research data about the relationship between student sense of agency and academic attainment and other measures of school success. And the third thing, which I think is an interesting through line, is around the importance of role models and modeled behavior in your different programs, and the impact that has on young people's social and emotional skills development. So Andreas, it would be great to get some reflections from you about those themes, and whether that is also borne out in some of the data coming from the study.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually really struck by the presentations by Laura, Marko, and Karima, because they show us that actually it's not that hard to develop social emotional skills. I think maybe actually a lot easier than many other things that we try to develop in school. As soon as we see learning less of a transactional and more of a relational experience, those social emotional skills actually happen. Arts and the music, and I must say that speaks to me also personally. It was for me in my life, it was music that actually got me engaged in education. And I learned discipline in music. I learned to listen to others. I learned to synchronize my own skills with those of others. And I think this is something that again, it's not very, the examples you illustrated, Laura, are not very hard to do if you think about it. You just need the space and attention to this, and it works in different social contexts. I think this is something really, really important. And Marko highlights, that social background is clearly one of the big barriers to the development of social and emotional skills. That's what the survey really illustrates. But you also highlight is, social emotional skills are one of the answers to this. It's one of the solutions. And once again, it didn't took you a lot of institutional capacity. You can actually, just by bringing students in disadvantaged areas together, transform their lives. And I think we often have that mentality that, schools should keep students inside and the rest of the world outside. And actually, the moment we better integrate, our educational institutions with our communities, we can see transformative results. Also, what Karima really highlights is we are all born with the kind of bonding social capital that relates us to, the people of our families, our friends, and people who think like us and work like us, and so on. But it does take effort to build that bridging social capital that makes me open to people from other communities, from other ways of thinking. And I think you illustrate again, once you change that paradigm, the institutions, all the world changes. So I do think that's the way we should, look at the future of education, to see education institutions more of a moderator of those kinds of social spaces, to better integrate the world of learning with the real world out there, maybe also with the world of work, to focus on that agency, but in Karima's term, also that co-agency. I need to develop agency to mobilize cognitive, social, and emotional resources, but I will not do that in isolation. I will do that with others. Maybe we should ban that word of extracurricular activities, because that just says it doesn't belong here. I think we should look at what should the curriculum be. Now, how can we actually engage with fewer things in greater depths? That's, I think, really what social emotional learning is about, to get away from the kind of mile-wide, inch-deep approach to learning, where we teach a lot of stuff at very superficial depths, to actually ask ourselves, what can You know, when I look at Marko's work, what can sports do to strengthen the relationship with myself, to make, you know, me take responsibility for myself, to take responsibility for other people, develop empathy, develop, you know, courage, leadership, whatever. I think we should ask ourselves, you know, what do our different school subjects contribute to those human qualities? And then, you know, probably we will throw out a lot of stuff that we don't actually need in the school curriculum and focus more in greater depth and those things that matter most. So I think these are, I think, three very inspiring examples for how school and learning could be very different. We should, you know, think less about the supply side, the provision, and more about, you know, what is it that actually makes people develop that energy and capacity to change and transform their life and the lives of others, to learn to live with themselves, to learn to live with other people, to learn to live with the planet. You know, I think these are the biggest challenges of our times.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. And I think that, you know, the study has some really interesting additional data, doesn't it, around the importance of relationships, whether that's peer relationships or relationships between students and teachers.
Yeah, you know, if I just may add one point, you know, we're just conducting our latest round of our PISA assessment, and this is just sort of from the initial field trial. But one thing that I was really struck with the fact whether, you know, teachers asked the students during the pandemic, you know, how are you? Build a personal relationship, had a much stronger impact on the academic outcomes than the volume of assignments that young people got. And again, I think it illustrates in this moment, if as a teacher, you were just a great instructor, you were out of business, you know, and if in this moment you could actually, you know, understand your students, pick them up, you know, where they are in their different personal context, it became a good coach, a good mentor, a good facilitator. You suddenly were very successful. So again, I think this is in the future will always surprise us. No?
Yeah, the emotional connection was, I think, really, yeah, more important than ever before during the pandemic, particularly, you know, when students weren't able to physically come into school. Andreas, are you able to stay with us for a couple of minutes, or do you have another?
No, I need to leave right away. I'm sorry, really sorry.
That's a good. Thank you very much for sharing the presentation and for your initial thoughts and for making time for this morning. And so Karima, Marko, and Laura will carry on the conversation, if that is okay. There are some really interesting ideas and points coming up in the chat. One of them revolves around mentoring. So I wonder if we could stick with that for a minute, and would love to hear from each of you about advice or recommendations or training programs that you offer for the leaders, whether they're volunteer leaders or parts of your project team in your respective areas of work, and how you encourage them to model the sorts of behavior that we've been talking about. Marko, maybe we could start with you, if that was okay.
Sure, thank you, Dominic. I apologize, there's a bit of background noise coming from my side. So in terms of our delivery model, we actually use young mentors from the communities that we work with, because again, we try and remove these barriers where we want these goals that children have to be attainable. And often it's quite ineffective if somebody from the UK or somebody with a different background comes in and tries to inspire the children, because of course they're coming from a different place with different circumstances, with different adversities. And so most of our young mentors, we have our own curriculum, the FundLife Leadership Academy, which again is very much focused on soft skills, on life skills, on fundamentals that don't require formal qualifications. All of our youth mentors are either still in school. We don't select them by graduation or degrees or any kind of formal recognition. It's more, are they somebody that could potentially be a positive influence on children in their communities? And so we undertake them through our own internal curriculum, which is very much around skills which are very easy, such as turning up on time, making sure that if we have committed to the child to be there 3 times a week at 4 p.m, we're there, because it creates a sense of interdependency between the mentor and the children, and also it creates a sense of we're willing to commit to those children, but at the same time there's an obligation for the children to also commit to their mentor. So it creates not just agency but also accountability, which is key. And then for the mentors that we work with, we have several different pathways, whether it's through sports training so they can get formalized qualifications to go into sports, whether it's partnering with other NGOs for digital inclusion. We also have pathways for youth if they actually want to go into professional public teaching. So there are various connections that we have, and again, it's not subscriptive. It's not, we don't go there and believe that one size fits all. It's very much seeing what that young person has to offer, figuring out what their passions are with their skills, and then trying to really steer them in that direction. But fundamentally, the starting point is, can they inspire the next generation to really reach their potential? And if the answer there is yes, or there's a willingness for that young person to teach, that's good enough usually for us.
Thank you. And yeah, that idea of, the importance of bringing young leaders from within the communities where you're working, I think is a really interesting takeaway for lots of people who are listening to this and thinking about how they might be able to replicate some of the achievements that your different programs have been able to bring into being. Karima, could we bring you in? And your work is in some ways is similar to Marko's, isn't it? That you're very much focused on supporting leadership from within the communities where you work.
In a way where the very concept of leadership dissolves, because the community I will give an example. There is a young woman who told us we were struggling at school. We want to create opportunities for the children in our neighborhood that we did not have. So they were thinking of creating school support. We started off having several workshops with these young women, and where they grew a strong connection between them, and really reflected, and they got into why they wanted to do what they wanted to do, where was the problem, and more so, where was the light, where was the opportunity. They grew this initiative that they called ta'allum, learning to learn. They said, if the children in our neighborhood learn to learn, well, we no longer have this problem that I used to knock at the neighbor's door because my parents couldn't read and write. The neighbor would take my homework, do it for me, and give it back to me. So ta'allum, we would have the young people on a volunteer base every day open up the community house, which is very small, 50 square meters. We would have 50 children, maybe even more sometimes, two children sitting in the same chair. And the question was, if a child could not do their homework, they would say, Ammo, uncle or auntie, I don't understand this. And the facilitator, the volunteer facilitator of ta'allum would come and say, I don't either, let's go and look for someone who does. The children facilitate for each other, but which many would recognize, okay, peer-to-peer learning. But what happened there is that children would come to the community house, not to do their homework, say, I have nothing to do today, but I want to facilitate. And they would do it the same way that the young people would do it. So during Corona, this community model went into the houses. Children did it between the neighbors. So the model diffused. It becomes a metabolic property of this ecosystem. And it's all about that relationship. So it grew connection between the families, connection between the children. And the children, what they did during the summer is that they would play, and in that play they would create games to help their learning. And so they went back to the school with the games to their teachers to say, this is how we would like to learn. So there's a diffusion process that happens. So it's the whole communities rather than leadership. It's about metabolic properties. How does this energy, how does the love that brings us together, as that young man said, how do we sustain that and nurture that? That doesn't mean there are no more conflicts, but when we find moments in conflict and tension, we trust that we can find the ease together. And it's in that trust, in the trusting our humanity that defines us and connects us, that all this process happen.
There's something really interesting and powerful as well, and with that example about the vulnerability that the volunteers display when they say they don't know the answer and they want to go and learn together. And similar to what Marko was saying, I think about how it feels like a hallmark or a characteristic of both your areas of work is creating that sense of co-agency or codependency. It isn't overtly about leadership necessarily. It's more about everyone who's involved in the work needing to work together for it to succeed. It's not something which is being done to the young people. It's very much being done with them. Mm-hmm. Laura, with your work, with maybe with the Voices of Haiti initiative, is that also something that was a characteristic of the choirs and the singing projects that you developed?
Yes. I have to say that the model is similar to the ones that Karima explained, based on the leadership. The young leader come from the communities. It is impossible in Haiti to do something if you don't deep inside the community. So we have a multidisciplinary team lead to the project, and we have a lot of professionals from Haiti and international professionals. I mean, we have a music maestro, we have a psychologist and a pedagogist inside, but at the same time we have a lot of people, volunteers from the community, that follow every weekend the choir. So we have 6 professionals that lead the program each weekend, but every weekend we have 22 people from the community that helps with the transportation, with food, and with everything. And these people made the control by the community. And usually, even when we are abroad with the kids, we have around 10 people from the community go around the world with us. And they receive training, especially on leadership training from the project and from Andrea Bocelli Foundation. So in the program, you have to think that the kids learn to read music so fast in 3 months. And all the other work is on leadership and intelligence and emotive intelligence, because you can understand that when the kids are out from the slum all around the world, in New York, in UN, or in the Vatican, live a very different life from their environment. So when they come back at home, can be a trauma if all the community and all of the professionals that work with us doesn't work in a properly way on their soft skill. The things, the extraordinary things that when the kids come back at home, became the leader of the community too. And they tell to all the people, that in Haiti slums, there are a lot of violence, a lot of violent people. And we have to discuss usually with people from the gangs. And when the kids come back, tell everything and all their experience to the people of their family and of the gangs too. And they became a good leader for the others, because they try to explain to the others that out of the slum there is a different world, and they can bring something from this different world inside. And they use music to do it, and to put together people, and to be better the life, the daily life of the community. So this is in Haiti, but we are doing the same all over the world with music programs. So we have to choose our people in the local community. In Italy too, we are working in the public school in Italy, but we have an agreement with the Ministry of Education to choose local people to work on music and arts inside the school. And we have also pedagogic control of the public school to empower the local people, and to empower social and emotional skills through music and arts inside the schools. So the secret is to work on social emotional skills for me is to work especially with local people, because local people know very well the social and emotional aspects of the community and of the kids. So one of the secrets to work better on social and emotional skills is to empower local people.
Lara, you introduced a really interesting additional component, which it's about, you said the children in the program learn to read music within 3 months. And so there's an element of, developing mastery or developing a new skill, and the role that plays in helping with motivation and engagement with other areas of the program. I think that, do you find that, are all the children able to learn to read music in that time period, or do you provide additional support for ones who are weaker in this area?
We developed a fast music program, especially that we used only in development country, because we would love to give more value to social and emotional skills. So we are developing for the choir of Voices of the World this type of method. And it's possible because the kids met together for 2 whole days every week. It's not the same in the Italian school, for example, because in Italian school we are using music and arts to develop especially creativity and team building. But in the development country, especially because Maestro Bocelli pushed to do this, he said to us, go fast to teach music to them, because we would love to put together a group of positive leaders to go around the world and to open their mind. So Andreas before talked about open-mindedness. So one of the characteristics that we want to develop with this project is this: works together, and trust, and international approach, and open-mindedness. So we use this approach because we need kids good at music too. We don't need to build musicians in Italy inside the public school, but to push the government, Haitian government, and all the other government to give to us the possibility to bring abroad these kids. We need that they were good at music at the beginning. So we develop with the Maestro Malcolm Merriweather, is an American music teacher that works in kindergarten and in university too. And so we decide to develop this fast approach because we need this. but we are focused on human being. We are not interested to educate or to grow the new Andrea Bocellis at the Andrea Bocelli Foundation. We would like to have a good leader for the communities, a positive leader for the communities. But sometimes, you know, that we need to be good professionals too. So we used to do at the same time both things.
Thank you, Laura. Marko, does that resonate with your work and the role that sport plays in your programs? That it isn't that there's the sort of twin benefits of one, the opportunity to get better at the different sports helps keep the students, keeps the young people involved and interested in the program, but then it's also sport as a means of achieving other development objectives.
Absolutely, and I think for us, really, as Laura finished there, the aim is not to create the next football superstar. There are tangible benefits for children who do develop soccer skills. There's scholarships. So the Philippine education system is based on the US system, where those children who do excel in sports, they can get a scholarship into college and university. So there are tangible benefits. On top of that, though, we really focus on creating a sense of unity within the community. So we create these football teams, and also it doesn't just impact directly the children. Yes, it gives them a sense of identity, it gives them purpose, it gives them sort of something to be proud of, because of course these communities have negative connotations. If you're from a certain slum, then of course you don't feel good about yourself because there's already a preconceived idea that you're poor, and children can understand this from a very young age. So that's one aspect, and then the other aspect, which perhaps is somewhat overshadowed, is that we create festivals, and this is a rare opportunity for these children who are ordinarily living in a separate world to those who are more affluent. It actually creates a level playing field, and it creates an opportunity for children from very affluent or privileged communities to actually interact with these communities through a level playing field where there isn't a imbalance. Usually, you know, there's often referent powers, or there's other kind of dynamics at play, but through sports, once you sort of cross that line, there is an inherent sense of fairness, and again that helps with, you know, creating empathy, not just for our communities but also for the communities that perhaps will be the future business and political leaders. So that's one of the things that we have noticed, and again, these are things which happened organically, and you know, that there are amazing examples of very close friendships being formed through festivals, where ordinarily these children who are living on, you know, less than $5 a day would never meet with children who are going to private schools where tuition costs, you know, upwards of $5,000 a semester. So these barriers are very easily broken, and to answer your original point, sports development is a plus, but it's not the overarching goal of the work that we do.
There's an interesting connection with what you said about the identity that comes with living in certain communities and how you feel the world views you. And I think, Karima, some of the work of Tamkeen, some of the things that you were telling me when we spoke last week, and it would be interesting, you know, Marko talked about, you know, the role the sports teams they create, and also the festivals they organize can help in overcoming some of the perceptions about how where you're from shapes who you are. And I know that's an area that you've given a lot of thought to, so it would be great to hear something about Tamkeen's approaches.
Yes, and I really resonate with what Marko and Laura said. Yet we have this question: how do we avoid to be in the trap that suddenly my sense of self is weaved in the fact that I can play an instrument, I'm in a choir, I play football, hence I am. How do we co-create the conditions for I am part of a football team, but it is being the part. It is in my relationship with others. It is and it is just one aspect of who I am, and there are so many. What we have experienced very much so is children, because they co-create their initiatives. Tamkeen, we don't come with the idea, nor with anything, but it's really in facilitating conversations and a lot of playfulness, Marko, and that suddenly there's like, oh, we would like to do this, and then we just facilitate that process of co-creating the initiative, and it can be anything. We had in one of the neighborhoods a football school. That football school, it was amazing. It was this young, very young man who used to take at 6 o'clock in the morning the children in his neighborhood to the beach to play football, and it slowly grew. It today became a football club, and it's having such a resonance beyond the neighborhood, and it created new bonds between neighborhoods and beyond. If you look at that community model and the essence there is there, which is a focus on the relationship, the human relationship, and you look at other community models like Ta'allum, learning to learn, or the community library, or all these different community models that are emerging in different communities, including schools or even faculty, universities, you will find the same essence. So when they meet, when all these experiences meet, they recognize each other, not in the activity, not in what we do, but in the how we do. And so what we are seeing is emerging this community-based learning ecosystems. And the learning is about, well, what does it mean to be a human being? And it is at an era where we are asking questions in terms of, we need to define what it means to be a human being, because we're competing with artificial intelligence. That dreadful question. I think it's to be able to go back to that, and to go back to that understanding, that embodied understanding, and to be able to trust our humanity. So it doesn't matter where we are. We have co-created, facilitated processes in schools that have extraordinary means, material means. We found apathy. We found deep grief in those children. It's not what I possess materially that defines my well-being. And but when these processes that have this essence meet, then we see today, tomorrow's society, a vision of a shared humanity.
There's an interesting connection with all of your areas of work as well, isn't there, around how your programs help the participants and the beneficiaries develop and refine their sense of multiple identities. So is it as a member of the community? Is it as a musician? Is it as a member of the choir? Is it as a member of the sports team? And how important that sort of sense of self-awareness is for development, and how we all carry multiple identities within us at any moment in time. And it's which one you choose to put to the front has a massive impact on the relationship and on the conversation or the social interaction that you're part of at that time. I thought it was interesting, Andreas said in his presentation earlier that students who self-reported a strong sense of belonging also reported higher social and emotional skills, and it wasn't clear from the survey whether those were which came first. Is it that the social and emotional skills reinforce the sense of belonging, or is it that the belonging reinforces the sense of reinforces the social and emotional skills? Yeah, I mean, the emphasis that all of your work places on creating community and helping people feel that attachment is also really striking. We have about 8 minutes left. I would love to ask two final questions to each of you, if that's okay. The first is around whether you encounter opposition to these programs, where you get pushback, and the arguments that you find most convincing or persuasive for helping secure support for this kind of work. So, you know, do you find, Laura, with your work, you know, there are people who are saying that music shouldn't be the priority or the area of focus, that young people need to be spending more time on maths and learning to read and write, for example. And so what are the arguments that you use to address that? And then, you know, the same question for Marko and Karima. But Laura, if we could start with you, please. You're muted, Laura. Sorry if you.
I have to say that our activities all over the world are never shown in opposition to the others, because we don't say never that it's better to study music instead of doing maths, for example. But we work so that math can also be learned through art and music. So we would like to share our approach. Art and music are languages to facilitate the development of the human being and the development also of the traditional education. So this may of course not be easy, particularly where the kids this kind of approach is built with the teacher who are often not used to this kind of methodology and language. But we try to underline to all our colleagues, and Maestro Andrea Bocelli said this the UNESCO 2 years ago at the opening of the UNESCO Assembly. Music and arts and digital are languages to facilitate the traditional education, but to facilitate also the development of a human being, so the social and emotional skills. These are the key to develop a better professionist, but at the same time, better citizen and human being too.
Thank you, Laura. Marko, do you encounter pushback or resistance to your, you know, to focusing on sport in your programming, and what arguments?
I think I wouldn't say pushback. I think that there's often a misconception, I guess, in terms of when we're speaking sometimes to traditional educational programs. I think sometimes people see this as it's not complementary to formal education, or perhaps they feel that sports can only do so much. And I think for us, we see so many layers, not just in terms of, as I mentioned, a couple of points, not just working with the youth directly, but actually creating a community asset model where you work with parents, where you work with other community leaders, where you develop you know, real transformative approaches to even gender equity. Most of our programs, we have a minimum of 40% girls playing. And so if you look at the numbers, we, you know, a byproduct of our work is that we increase female participation by over 400%. In some communities, we create women-friendly spaces. And so when we talk about all of the things around, you know, economic empowerment, dignified opportunities for women, they all have a place if we can work in complementary or side to side, I guess, to existing systems. But I think that there just needs to be more, I would like to see more honesty and more honest discussions that, you know, some systems are not currently fit for the purpose they were intended for. I think we were discussing with Lara before we started the webinar that, you know, the education system was built 100 years ago. And fundamentally, it hasn't changed. Whereas if you look at the world, it's fundamentally different just in the last 10 years. And, you know, we haven't even spoken about mental health and the impact that now social media has on young kids. The lockdowns of COVID, I noticed there were some comments in terms of what youth need during these lockdowns, and especially in the Philippines where schools are still closed. So you're dealing with communities that have been locked down for over 18 months. Play is technically still restricted. So it's very multi-layered, I would say. And I think I wouldn't say we get pushback, but I think sometimes there is some sort of, I don't know, we tend to look down because our team is not full of academia or professionals, and our work is sometimes, I would say, undervalued for the impact it can have. So I would leave it at that. I mean, there's probably a lot more I can say on this subject, but I think fundamentally, going back to Andreas' initial point, I would like for there to be more unity and more complementary actors working together, rather than saying, well, the Ministry of Education is in charge of education. There isn't a need for other actors to be involved in that space.
One of the powerful ways in which the findings from the report can be used is around that sort of advocacy argument, that the development of social and emotional skills is really fundamental to the development of cognitive skills or academic progress. So if the person that any of us are interacting with's primary area of concern is academic attainment or academic progress, then there's a strong argument that we can all make for the value of social and emotional skills as a route to achieving that, and that all of your different programs play very important roles there. Karima, I'd love to get your thoughts just on whether there is pushback to the community approach that you take and how you address that.
Thank you, Dominic. To answer that, I will answer a question that was asked. Somebody said, what are the basic psychological skills that teachers should learn? I think it was Marko and who asked that question. I will, in one of our sessions in the teacher training for many years, one future teacher told us, you have woken up the child that had died in us. We promise you, wherever we go, we will not let the child die in our students. When I met with one of the top management of the education system, sharing the process and the teacher training, sharing the process and what we're seeing, the community models emerging in different neighborhoods, the processes happening in schools and faculties, and how all these processes connect. At one point he said, but you are telling us to come and buy from your shop, and then that what we are going to buy, we are going to make. That is not an easy thing to say and to understand. Well, the main thing is that there's nothing to buy and there's nothing to sell, because all is there already. And that is the biggest challenge, is to be able to say, let's go to what we have. Let's go to the potential. Let's learn to see it. Let's learn to see with different eyes, whether it's in a school or in a company, or whether it is in a neighborhood or in a village. Let's learn to see with different eyes. And when we do that, when we are able to see the potential, when we are able to see that everyone has his place, that everyone is perfect as he is, and create this bond, everything changes. So where's the pushback? It's the impatience. We need time, we need to go fast. We have indicators, we have putting these processes into project management frameworks. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So the whole context needs to be changed. The whole thinking. Now, the biggest challenge here is to think of social emotional skills in terms of something we're going to teach. But rather, let's think in terms of what do we need to take off from these systems that are highly dehumanizing to allow for our children to be children, to allow for the expression of what we are and who we are.
I have just seen the time and that we're at the end of the 2 hours, which has flown by. So I'd like to first of all thank the three of you and Andreas enormously for sharing your expertise and insights and wisdom on this topic. You're all involved in really important and amazing work, and I hope that for the audience who've been with us this morning, there are some really exciting and interesting insights that they will be able to take away and apply in their own different contexts. I'd also like to thank ETS, QFI and Microsoft, who've been Salzburg Global's partners in the Education for Tomorrow's World series for many years now. As I said at the very beginning, this is the first of 2 webinars that we're organizing today on this topic. So for those of you for whom it is the morning, we have another webinar starting at 6 p.m. Central European time, so in about 8 hours, where Andreas will be presenting again, and we will then have a panel discussion with experts talking about the role of active citizenship in social and emotional skills development, particularly in El Salvador and Central America, about the role that video gaming can play in helping develop these kinds of skills. So a different take on, on the sport advantage, and also on arts and well-being in SEL development. So for those of you who can, you'd be very welcome to join us for the second part of this discussion. But once again, thank you very much to everyone who's been with us for the 2 hours this morning, and particularly to Laura, Marko and Karima. And I wish you all safe and happy days ahead. Thank you.